All right, this morning there's a potentially worrying new development amid the rising tensions in Eastern Europe. Ukraine and Russian-backed rebels in the east of the country are trading accusations that each side has fired across an existing ceasefire line. That's according to Reuters. There's also more doubt being cast over Russia's claims it has been pulling back some troops from the Ukrainian border. Russia's defense ministry released this video today, which it says shows tanks returning to their home bases after completing exercises. But last night, a senior Biden administration official disputed Moscow's claims, saying, quote, "We now know it was false." In fact, that official said the opposite, that as many as 7,000 troops have been added at the border, some as recently as Wednesday. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is in central Ukraine for us this morning, and NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin joins us from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Good morning to both of you. Matt, I want to start with you and these reports I just mentioned where we're seeing alleged exchange of fire in eastern Ukraine. Now, this is an area that has had this existing separatist conflict ongoing. This is separate from the current Russian troop buildup. But what do we know at this stage, and what could this potentially mean?
Yeah, I mean, Savannah, the short answer is not a whole lot. What we do know is that both sides are blaming each other, as you just mentioned. We heard from the Ukrainian army that 3 employees of this kindergarten were injured. It's kind of amazing that no children were hurt, because we understand that there were children around. But again, they said that there were 32 122 millimeter shells that were fired from the separatist enclave. And again, this has been cleaved out of Ukraine for the past 8 years, ever since Russia first invaded back in 2014. So again, these sorts of exchange of fire, they actually happen fairly regularly. They're not new, they're not unique, but they rarely involve civilians. And this one is unique because, of course, and kind of goes without saying, tensions are sky high. And that's one thing that we keep hearing from military analysts and from U.S. intelligence, is that Vladimir Putin and the Russians are waiting to just create a casus belli, a pretext for war. And this is part of their playbook. They did this in Georgia back in 2008 when Russian troops went into that country and cleaved off a part of that country. So what they really want is for some minor incident, some minor skirmish, to create a reaction or foment a reaction from the Ukrainians, and then that would allow them to say, okay, well, we're going to have a reaction ourselves. We're going to go in and defend ourselves or defend the Russian-speaking population in eastern Ukraine. It's just part of the playbook. We've seen it done before, and that's the big concern here. Guys?
Yeah, Erin, I want to ask you more about this and this potential for using this as this justification for invasion that we're concerned about. While these details are still unclear about exactly what is going on within this separatist area, we have heard these multiple warnings of so-called false flag operations. Tell us about those and how concerned the government in Kyiv is about that, and are there fears on the ground of this potentially escalating things?
Well, speaking to Ukrainian military experts here in Kyiv, and they are extraordinarily concerned about the possibility of an escalation in eastern Ukraine. In fact, they see that as a high probability going forward. So obviously the military here is watching the situation extremely closely. They're also concerned about those so-called false flag operations. U.S. officials also have been very vocal about that. Earlier in the month, the United States actually divulging its intelligence about a potential false flag operation they were alleging was being cooked up by Moscow, involving a graphic video as well as actors' fake blood. Now, no one outside of the United States has seen that video, but false flags remain a concern going forward. Doesn't seem like that was a motive behind today's escalation, given that the kindergarten question was shelled on the government side of the line. But I was speaking to Ukrainian military experts, and they say yes, false flags are a concern. However, the more that we talk about them, the more that they are raised in conversations, the less of a surprise they will be, and the less likely in the eyes of people here in Kyiv that the Kremlin will use that as a tactic.
Matt, now I want to ask you about this other concerning headline. So U.S. officials continuing to dispute these claims by Russia that it's been pulling back some of its forces from the Ukrainian border. So tell us, I mean, they're actually saying that Russia is in fact adding more, right?
Yeah, I mean, there had been some optimism for the last 2 days here in Ukraine, especially from the western side, from Washington, from London. It had looked like this whole situation was kind of deflating a little bit. But now we're starting to see that there was a pinprick into that. And now Western capitals are saying that it looks as though there's no evidence that the Russia is withdrawing troops, as they kind of said that they would or implied that they would. Instead, we're hearing from Washington that there's another 7,000 troops being added on top of the 150,000 that President Joe Biden said were already there. That number itself was kind of surprising, since we at NBC and others hadn't really gone above 130,000 before that. So really, we're seeing more and more troops accumulating, even as Russia is saying that they're withdrawing and releasing these fresh videos showing what they describe as troops withdrawing. But those are hard to verify. The only people who are able to show any evidence are the Russians themselves. So it's hard to really believe them. The best indications that temperatures are cooling around this conflict are just from the words of the Russian officials themselves, who have opened more space for diplomacy and said that they're going to be partially withdrawing troops and returning them to their so-called permanent positions. But beyond that, there isn't much on-the-ground evidence, and that's something that, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It's something we'd have to wait for, and it's something that Western officials say, we can't just believe this now. We have to wait for really firm evidence. And Ukrainian officials are saying that too, guys.
Erin, let's talk a little bit more about the diplomacy side of this. NATO defense ministers have been meeting today for another round of talks. What's the latest there?
Yeah, that meeting is now underway. It was started with remarks from the NATO Secretary General reiterating what we've heard from U.S. officials as well as Ukrainian officials, that they have seen no signs of a Russian military withdrawal as yet. NATO, of course, is at the center of this current crisis, with Russian President Vladimir Putin demanding that Ukraine not be allowed to be a member of NATO, effectively be ruled out, something that the United States has rejected as a demand, as has Ukraine. We heard from President Zelensky just this morning in an interview with the BBC say that NATO membership is essential to guaranteeing the safety of Ukraine. It is worth noting it is also part of the Ukrainian constitution. So how this square is circled, of course, remains to be seen. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, today saying that Russia is sending its response to the U.S. proposal later today. Guys.
All right, Erin and Matt, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.